need to make sure that you, I actually double wrap anything that's been, the food that's been manipulated, so that we don't end up with freezer burn food. Because there's nothing worse than getting a hamburger out that tastes so old that you don't really want to eat it or feed the dog with it. So,
is it possible to freeze in a glass jar?
it is if you leave space.
Space.
Because all
I've
food,
had those explosions
yes,
before.
that when you freeze in a glass jar, you need to allow what we call expansion space, because everything has water in it. And when water freezes, it expands. That's why ice cube trays, if you fill them all the way at the top, end up being on one big clump of cubes instead of single cubes when you go to knock them out of the tray.
Right.
And so that it's a situation that you need to be sure that that you leave like a headspace of at least an inch.
An inch.
At least an inch. Now, you'll notice I'm patting this down, and then I'm going to fold it back and try to pinch out as much air as I can, so that when I go to put this in the freezer, it won't get the ice cubes on it like the rhubarb did or the beans.
Right.
Okay? And then the other thing is, if you remember to pat things down flat before you put them in the freezer, you can make a lot of freezer space that way.
Nice and stackable.
Instead of having them all bunched like this, this falls out of the freezer all the time.
Right.
Because I have an upright freezer, because I'm too short to use a chest freezer, because I'd have to do a head dive into the bottom if I was picking something out.
That doesn't
so
sound
freezing
good.
is really, really easy. Another alternative to that, as we talked about meats, it doesn't work well with baked products because it sucks the air out. But this is what they refer to as a vacuum seal. And so that you use special kinds of freezer weight bags, and you'll notice feel how heavy those are.
Yeah, that's really heavy.
But they also have texture in them, so that you can put, say, a single pork chop, or the size you want to serve, into the bag. And instead of having to fold the bag down like I did with the spinach, all you do is you just put it into the tray, and then I don't have it plugged in, but then you push the button, and it sucks all the air out, so that this bag is very tight against all surfaces of the product that you have in there. And when I first got this, I like to experiment. I don't like to read the manual first. And so I thought, well, I had a dozen bagels, and there's only 2 of us, so I made up 3 packages of bagels. Little did I realize, as the vacuum was sucking the air out from the bag, it also sucked the air out of the bagels, and I ended up with hockey pucks.
Oh, that'd
couldn't
be a
use
different
them.
kind of bagel.
Couldn't use them at all. So baked products don't
Powerful machine.
Yes, it is. And it's nice because you can make the bags as big or as small as you want, because as soon as it seals, then you can trim off the extra. But this is something that's relatively new, and it's one that I use a lot as we get into our dehydrated food thing, because we're backpackers. We use this to pack up our meals. So that way they're fresh, but I can also boil in these bags.
Wow.
So that way, I got it for backpacking purposes and for dehydrated foods. So again, it's another way to freeze foods, whether they be wet or dry. And you need to realize that things like pepperoni, bacon, any of your cured meats are going to always have a different flavor after you've frozen them, no matter how carefully you do, because all of them have had salt brine put into them.
Okay.
And so they're going to lose their water. So like if you've got a ham and you made ham for a special dinner, and you've got part of it left over, and you freeze it, it's just not going to be the same flavor. So plan on not being used as a ham steak, but rather stir fry or ham and beans or something where you've got other flavors to go with it. It's still food safe.
Right.
But it's just the flavor is slightly different. Pepperoni is always going to be a little bit greasier. So, like when you buy commercially made pepperoni pizzas, there's always the pool of grease on the top because they've been frozen. Now, if you got it fresh, the same pepperoni wouldn't extract that grease.
Wow.
So the grease is there, but you just don't see it.
So you can tell if you're eating it fresh.
Yes, exactly. But the curing process is what causes a problem with the change in flavors. So no matter how carefully you package it, you're still going to have a change. The same thing with cheese. Cheese can be frozen. And quite often, if I find a good sale on cheese, I will buy it, but then repackage it into smaller packages to use for casserole toppings and stuff. But I'm never going to plan on using it for cheese and crackers.
Right.
Because it always crumbles after it's frozen, because the water in the cheese from the milk product will have broken apart because of the ice crystals, and it becomes dry.
So you have a really different
A
flavor.
different well, it's not so much.
Consistency.
Yeah, the consistency is what is the problem.
Right.
And cottage cheese can be frozen that way, but potatoes we cannot freeze. Commercially, we can freeze them because they've got special gases they use with them. But if we try to freeze potatoes, there's one recipe that I know of that you can freeze mashed potatoes, but you add cream cheese to it to keep them together. But if you just try to slice potatoes to make homemade fries and put them in the freezer, they'll turn black.
Ooh.
Because we don't have the
Sounds
special
good.
gas that they use in the commercial industry to keep them white. And so, when you buy one, get one free bag of, 20 pounds of potatoes, and there's only one of you, it probably isn't a good choice. That's when you
Right.
donate 20 pounds to the pantry.
Yes, I agree.
And so it's those kinds of things you have to think about when you're thinking about freezing and buying quantities and what things you can put in the freezer. The other thing is to consider your space, because an overpacked freezer is just as bad as having an empty freezer, because it can't get down in temperature. It won't stay at 0, and 0 is what you should have your freezer set at. So if you're only working with a freezer in the upper part of a refrigerator or that kind of thing, don't plan on keeping foods in that freezer for very long periods of time, because they will deteriorate because they aren't down to 0 temperature.
Right.
And there are people who I suggest always having a refrigerator freezer thermometer to check both the refrigerators and freezers, because freezers need to be at 0 and refrigerators need to be at 45.
45 and 0.
Yeah, and 45 is cold. And most refrigerators, particularly those of us that have the fancy ones with the door stuff on, all the stuff on the doors, and all that kind of thing, normally don't get any colder than 50.
Oh.
And 5 degrees doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're storing food, that is a big deal.
Yeah.
And so again, we're talking food safety. Again, we can use publications from the Extension Office. We can also use the Ball and Kerr books, because they have directions on blanching. Like I said, when I did the spinach, I looked it up this morning because I don't remember them. The bigger the pieces, the longer they have to be blanched, is basically the rule. But it's only 2, 3, 4 minutes at the most by quantity. And so like if you're doing asparagus, you've got to weigh out the asparagus. Don't just throw it in because it's coming fresh out of the garden.
Right.
And those kinds of things, or because there's another half cup of peas that you're going to just throw them in, because it's, again, going to throw off the balance of time versus the amount to get those enzymes cut down, so they won't freeze or burn along the way. And so it's easy, but again, following some of the rules makes it simple, and makes a good quality food along the way.
Yeah.
So hopefully you've all picked up a few ideas of how to be a successful freezing queen, and we appreciate and we appreciate the chances to share this information with you, coming from the Monroe County Extension Office and Mother Hubbard's Cupboard here in Bloomington, Indiana. If you have other questions, don't hesitate to call our office at 349-2575, and we can get the answer for you. Again, thank you, and hope to see you another day.